Hello everyone, today I'll be narrating 3 new creepyposts that I found off of the Let's Not Meet subreddit. Liking this video and subscribing to my channel helps me a lot. After you've heard these stories, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. But without further ado, let's dive straight into their experiences.
These are their stories.
So a 20-year-old female lived in a shady apartment complex in an otherwise rich, suburban area for 3 years. This story is about a neighbor that I'll call Bob. A little backstory, me, 18 years old at the time, and my then 16-year-old sister used to babysit all the neighborhood kids. These kids considered us their friends, and it got to where they seemed to have a radar of when me and my sister went outside. They'd come out and talk to us, and we let them ride our skateboards and such in the parking lot. The kids were ages 8 to 13. So one day we were outside with them and we were joined by a stranger. He stood between us and our car, towering over us. He introduced himself and asked us to sign a petition he made up. We did, just being friendly, then he asked us how old we were. I thought maybe he was a fellow teenager that looked older or that he was just awkward. So I told him I was 18, and the very next question was if I wanted to go out with him. In front of my mom and the other kid's mom, I awkwardly declined, but he continued talking about how he thought me and my sister were in middle school. Also, he was 28. Eventually, he wandered away to ask someone else to sign his petition. A few days later, he knocked at our door after asking neighbor for the address. He had a bag of what he said was chicken and wanted us to go eat it with him at the park. We declined because we both had schoolwork to do. He walked away and he was mumbling about how antisocial everyone was. Later, we look out our window and see him playing baseball with 2 girls. He kept physically moving their arms to different positions even though they shrugged away from him. Next day, one of the kids runs up to me. I'll call her Maddie. She's 8. She's got a new pair of Heelys and wanted help with them. I was holding her hand and guiding her along when Bob appears and says he can help better. Maddie says no, but he insists. He pushed me aside and reaches for Maddie, holding her tightly around the upper chest area. Her grandma was there too and flips out. He wanders away. The next day, Maddie's freaking out, saying Bob was just sitting on her porch when she left for school that morning. Her parents found out, and as they walked outside, he let himself in, and they said he went to their kitchen to make orange chicken. We later found out another neighbor had a similar story. Another time, we were helping a family move. They have a 2-year-old son. The garages are in a triangle shaped to the road, almost a roundabout. There's a flat patch of grass behind them. Well, here comes Bob to help us. He criticized the way we packed things and didn't help until our neighbor politely asked him to leave. Well, he left the garage, but instead of leaving, he asked the 2-year-old if he wanted to play. The kid said no, and it made him mad. He picked up the kid to play, and the kid slapped him. He asked the kid if he wanted to go behind the garages to play ball, so I go with him and guide the kid to his mom. The climax of the story is when me and my sister went on a walk with our 17-year-old friend and her other friend. Maddie found us and wanted to come along, so we are starting our walk when Bob comes out. He sees our friend and asks how old she is and how much she weighs because she's so skinny. He asks where we're going. My friend tells him we're going for ice cream on a girls trip. We didn't ask her to say that. He's like, "Aw man," and stomps away. We continue our walk, but halfway through we have a weird feeling. I look behind us and Bob is running towards us. He yells at us for hiding from him while also telling Maddie how pretty she is. An older neighbor sees this and asks him what's going on. He tells them that we're being mean and he needs to go write a song about us. He leaves, but we see him sitting at the park. Well, he saw us and again comes running. We stop and he asks which one of us is over 18. Maddie's dad is here at this point and tells him we aren't interested in him. He explodes, telling the dad to screw himself and that he's so rude. Maddie is crying and the neighbor who saw us before came to check on us since he saw Bob running. Bob goes inside, muttering to himself. For weeks we don't see him. A single dad and his 5-year-old daughter move in and we are introducing ourselves to them. My mom kind of tips him off that there's someone in their building who is a little off, especially around Maddie. The dad says he's seen someone like that giving kids candy at the pool when the kids looked uncomfortable. Well, here comes Bob, as if on cue. He immediately tells the girl in front of her dad that she looks like a movie star and that she's so pretty. He asks to play with her, but the dad says no and they go inside. Turns out they're next door neighbors. We still didn't see him much, but other neighbors were telling us stories about him. There's a woman who's alone most of the day with her 2 kids under 5 who told us he watches her when she goes to and from her car. Also, Maddie's parent continued to see him watching her. Then one day we're again babysitting and here he comes. Only this time he's swinging nunchucks. Maddie screams and hides in our car. Bob strolls over with his nunchucks and starts talking to us all casual. Then his head cranes to look into the car and he says, "Where's Maddie?" We told him she wasn't here and he walked away. By then, most of the kids were afraid to go outside when they saw him. He had a habit of wandering around the complex. We could tell by his height and lanky gait. A few times we'd see Bob with his dad. Those times, neither of them glanced at us. Then one day he just stopped showing up. We'd see his dad and brother come in and out all the time, but never him. We only saw him again a year later, and it was only for one day near Christmas, and then he disappeared again. So I don't know what happened to him, but it was just one of our weird experiences with neighbors in the 3 years living there. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts as we hadn't seen one another in a while. Dunkin' Donuts is a 15-minute walk from my house, so I decided I would walk. Besides, the weather was fine. I got to Dunkin' Donuts and found where Sarah and Lisa were sat, so I went to join them. As we were chatting, I noticed that my sister, Alina, was sat at a table in the corner of the room with her friend, Jess. For some context, my sister and her friend are both 18 years old. My sister still lives with my parents, whereas I live alone. I excused myself from the table and went over to Alina and Jess's table. They were sat at a table with 3 seats, so I went to sit down and said hey. They both jumped a little bit, but then looked more relieved than anything to see me. Immediately, Alina whispered to me, "Don't look now, but the guy in the blue shirt, I think he's following Jess and I." I glanced over and saw the middle-aged man sat at a table facing away from us. He's passed our table a good 5 times in the past 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he walks slower as he passes us, she continued. I told them that they were most likely being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about, but for their peace of mind, I offered to leave with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off and assumed my sister to be paranoid. Literally about a minute later, I saw the man get up from his seat and walk towards the bathroom. My eyes followed him, and sure enough, he walked extremely slow past Alina and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obviously slow he became. Both Alina and Jess looked in my direction, and I nodded to show that I had seen him walk slower. About 5 minutes later, I went into the toilets. On my way, I passed Alina and Jess and told them I was ready to leave whenever they were. They both agreed that they were ready to leave now. I told them that I was just going to go to the bathroom and that we could leave after I had done my business. Alina had come in her car, so she was going to give me a lift back. I went into the toilet stall, did said business, washed my hands. I was walking down the corridor back into the main eating area when Alina and Jess rushed into the corridor. I asked them what's up and they explained that another man had joined the strange creeper men and that the men were both pointing and staring at them, so they rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back into the eating area. I put my money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off and I would explain what was going on when I got home. We all got into Alina's car and left the creeps in the car's rearview mirror. After a 2-minute drive, we reached my house. Just then, I remembered that I had been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mother, so I asked if Alina could drive me to my parents' house as she was going there anyway. I jumped at the car to get what I needed when my phone rang. It was Alina. She explained that a car had driven past and had pulled into a driveway. She said the driver of the vehicle was the creep from Dunkin' Donuts. I looked out of my window and sure enough, there was a car which didn't belong to the owner of the house parked on their driveway. I got the girls into my house and locked the door. I instructed Alina to take a photo of the car and its license plate, and I told Jess to call 911 as she gave the operator more information than what I could. Alina took the photos and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had finished telling the story and I heard the operator assure us that the police would be at my house soon. A few minutes passed and there was a loud knock at the front door followed by a loud voice shouting, "It's the police." We all did a sigh of relief as I went to open the door. Jess told the operator that the police were here and she hung up. I was in the process of unlocking the door when I thought to look through the spy hole at the top of the door. I peered through and it wasn't a police officer, it was the same guy. I froze in fear and I didn't know what to say. We didn't call the police. I managed to shout back to the man through the door. Alina and Jess were both confused as to why I said this. "We had a call, sir." The man shouted back, "You have the wrong address." I yelled back and informed the girls that it was the creep at the door and not a police officer. Both were rightfully shocked and extremely scared, as was I. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again until I heard the sirens. "Sir, you have to let me in." The man shouted again. This time I didn't answer. He was pounding on the door. His commands for me to let him in turned into begging and pleading. I heard the police car pull up and some commotion outside. An actual police officer knocked on the door and I let him in. Yes, I checked the spy hole first. The police officers took the man into custody while another police officer took Alina and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents and Jess called hers. Both were here extremely quickly once we told them what had happened. The man was found with a kitchen knife on his person and some other weapons in his car. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't looked through the spy hole first. Both my sister and her friend are fine, just shaken up after the whole incident. Back when I was 17 or 19, I worked at a small local bakery. There were less than 15 employees spread across all the night and day shifts, so we only had a few people working during the day. One of these people was Dave, the delivery driver. Dave immediately gave me an off vibe. He was in his mid-50s and way too friendly to a teenage girl, but the boss told me straight up that yes, he could be annoying, but no one worked harder than he did, so just ignore his antics. When I signed the paperwork, they never asked me to submit to a background check. In hindsight, that should have been red flag number 2. Over the course course of the year or so that I worked with Dave, I tried very hard to ignore him. He was rarely outright creepy, but he was always just a bit too friendly. He would stick around long after his shift was over to talk to me and the other pastry chef on shift. He always wanted to lick the bowl after I made Rice Krispie treats. He would always stand in front of the racks of equipment or ingredients, just enough that sometimes my hand would brush him while reaching for something. He always stood just a little too close. He was constantly asking me about my life, what I liked, what I did for fun, if I had a boyfriend. Almost daily, he would tell me how a nice girl like me should have a boyfriend, how maybe a boyfriend would be good for me. I let this slide because sometimes older people can say things that were meant differently in their time. Then it was concert invites. Every other week he had tickets to one concert or another. Once he figured out my genre of music, it was almost exclusively tickets to bands I desperately wanted to see. But I also knew I should not go anywhere with him. I don't like to associate with coworkers outside of work anyway, and I had seen way too many red flags about Dave to trust him for even a second. My birthday came. He brought me a t-shirt. It was 2 sizes too small. He told me to try it on. I said no. He told me to try it on after work and text him a photo. He gave me his number. He asked for mine. I said no. He asked for the other pastry chef for my number. She had my back and refused as well. He also brought me 2 tickets to a band I'd been wanting to see. VIP section, 21+-year-old only. He said he could get me in, but I had to go with him and him alone. I refused. He told me he could get me booze. I declined. For months and months this continued. I brought it up to one of my bosses, but they laughed it off as classic Dave. When he wanted a hug on his birthday and hugged me without my consent. That's Dave for you. Offering to get me booze or pot? Ah, Dave, you scamp. When he pulled up his shirt and showed me his abdominal scar from a snowboarding accident, well, that's just Dave. No respect for boundaries, but a good worker. I seriously considered having one of my male friends come in under the guise of being my boyfriend just to placate Dave. I was repulsed by him, but he hadn't really done anything to classify himself as a predator. Besides asking for my number, he had never tried to harass me outside of work hours. And besides the odd hug or two that I was too afraid/shy to refuse, he hadn't gotten super physical. Then one day, Dave was gone. His name disappeared from the employee roster. My boss asked to see me in the office. She informed me that Dave was no longer employed at their business. Dave had been fired. Dave was fired because Dave was a convicted offender. Davey here had 2 counts of assault and 1 count of kidnapping a minor from the mid-90s, about the time I was born actually. They had never background checked him, and when they contacted a friend at the police department, they found out that Dave had been lying on lots of paperwork, hiding the fact that he was a convicted felon and not notifying anyone when he moved. Once they brought this information to the police department's attention, they had a few more charges to add. They found out because apparently he had been stalking and harassing one of the clients he delivered to, showing up at her home when he should not have known where she lived. After his termination, Dave showed up to work one day. He had a weapon, but I never found out what he had. They told him to leave or the police would be called. He ended up leaving in handcuffs. I am so thankful I wasn't there that day. Another little tidbit, the police officer my bosses knew had been in the PD for a while and knew one of the officers who had arrested Dave in the 90s. That abdominal scar was from a run-in with the cops and he got injured trying to climb over a fence. That was a few years ago, but sometimes I still think about how badly things could have gotten had I gone to even one of those concerts with him. Alright, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments below. But as always,
Have a nice day.